Up again so that the motion will be clear of whether or not you want to table it or whether or not you want to continue it. And so, can I do that, Attorney?
Yes.
Okay.
I second it. That's
Okay,
just for
so
discussion. It's just for discussion, so it's a motion. Just for a point of clarification, it's a motion to reconsider
Motion to reconsider.
the vote, and it was seconded and it was made by one of the members of the prevailing side. It was seconded, I heard, by Commissioner Martin.
No, seconded by Commissioner Martin.
Oh, Loyola, excuse me.
So,
And he was also on the prevailing.
so in order that there's no confusion, because I don't want a confusion to go to the next step, whether we tabled it or we asked for a continuance. So the floor is open.
No, you have to vote on the motion to reconsider.
So vote now there's, it's a procedural vote on the motion to reconsider.
All those in favor of reconsidering, say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, with point of order, that's a debatable motion.
Now,
That's not a motion to table. The motion to reconsider is a debatable motion.
No, not until you reconsider it.
well, it's a procedural, so let me pull out my Robert's rules, but I'm fairly certain you can consider, yes, you can discuss the motion to reconsider, yes, absolutely.
Okay, all right.
You can have discussion on reconsideration.
Mr. Parliamentary, you're on.
I think the idea here is clear from all of the testimony so far that we have concerns about this item as it was presented, and that there should be some more discussion and debate and research. And I think that the time period we talked about is a reasonable time period. It was requested by one of our petitioners tonight. So I think
Are you in favor of the
going back
motion?
in,
Are you in favor of reconsideration or
no,
not?
I'm speaking against the motion.
To reconsider?
Right. So I'm in favor of voting no on the motion to reconsider.
Okay.
Well, we're still in the discussion stage.
Yeah.
So if we were voting on a motion to table, in my opinion, the time deal is not an issue. So at any time after this meeting, because I don't think you can pull it off the table during the same meeting under some circumstances, maybe. I won't state an opinion on that. But those of you on the winning side can pull it off the table at the next meeting. Where under a continuum, it would be for the time frame, is the way I understand it. But I'm correct.
But again, the way I understood the substance of the motion, because again, it's imperfect, and so you're trying to just get to the intent, right?
Right.
So it was essentially substantively a motion to continue for 6 months, is what I heard. He used the word table, but that's what I.
Because he had the feedback from the city council and all that.
Right. So anyway, so there should be, point of order, there should be discussion on the motion for reconsideration, and that can continue.
If I can,
Go ahead, Matthew.
suggest why we might want to reconsider this as a committee, I think it's important. Thank you. I tried that. It didn't work. I promise. I think it's important to clarify the fact that this not only is a recommendation from a fellow citywide committee, but this actually was presented before City Council as a result of a citizen petition, as I understand, correct? So these were residents of Phoenix who banded together to say that they wanted this to be heard, they wanted it to be discussed. And we're choosing as a committee to either put it off indefinitely, not to be discussed at all, or to put it off for 6 months and to only be brought back then when City Council has asked us to bring back some input and information for their next subcommittee meeting. So I think we strongly need to reconsider whether this gets discussed right now and thoroughly and voted on by this committee, because we do have a say in these issues.
Mr. Chairman, to that point,
Yes.
to the contrary, I want more citizen involvement. I want stakeholders that have been engaged in this, or that are directly impacted by it, to have additional input. So nothing could be further from the reality of citizen involvement. The only reason why I'm concerned about it is the process issue. That's the issue for me. And the more dialogue that we have from stakeholders, to me, the better. So I'm not in favor of the reconsideration.
I have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old at home who are directly impacted by this.
Okay, Rick?
Mr. Chairman, I only asked the question because it was a little confusing. And I only support the reconsideration so that we can clarify what the motion is and handle it appropriately. If it's a continuance, then we have the opportunity to at least make our case why it should or shouldn't be continued and have that discussion that you were trying, some of you were already trying to have just on the reconsideration. So I support the reconsideration only to get the motion clarified and to handle it in the appropriate way. If it's a motion to table, it won't be debatable. If it's a motion to continue it for 6 months, we can talk about it and then we can vote. And I don't anticipate the vote to be any different. It's just a process thing for me.
Anybody else? Yeah, Gail?
Now I'm totally confused.
Okay, go ahead. Welcome to the club.
I didn't hear the part about it was coming back to us for us to give recommendation based on a recommendation that has already been decided by decision makers above us. So did I miss that in the presentation?
We never got to it.
No, but were they asking for our input before they vote? I mean, what am I missing?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Knight, so these design guidelines were recommended by the Complete Streets Advisory Board, an action that was taken in March. And so with that action, a process was, and a schedule was set up for the design guidelines to come through the Citizens Transportation Commission as well as the Planning Commission and Development Advisory Board to make recommendations to the City Council's Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee and then ultimately to the City Council. So that was the process that was set up. While that was underway, a citizen petition was submitted to the City Council for them to take action sooner at a meeting last week, essentially without the input of all those boards and commissions. What the council did was take an action to move the schedule up sooner for the boards and commissions to provide input. And so that's how this got here today.
Anybody else? Gabe?
So these city council subcommittee deadline is not a solid deadline. They were accommodating for input from us and others.
Yes, so they are scheduled to have this item on their agenda at the subcommittee on May 8th.
But that can be postponed if we do not have a recommendation.
So there would still be an item on that agenda. What the subcommittee does at that point with that item is up to them. And so we will report to them what this commission has done. If it's a continuous, we'll report that the commission continued the item or whatever it might be.
So we can request that they delay their
No, we
decision.
can't, no. I don't think we can do that. It's just, I think the situation we're at is, whatever action we take, that'll be the recommendation that goes to the subcommittee. The subcommittee, because they're made up of all council members, the ones that are a part of that subcommittee, they can decide to say, well, we're not going to take the recommendation, we want to go ahead and hear it. So ours is only a recommendation to the subcommittee.
So, Mr. Chairman, what I perceive to be is an input from certain groups or individuals on the 5th bullet, and that was the only item that I heard they had concern the other items that we're not concerned.
No,
Those
there's,
are substantive items.
Yeah, yeah, Mayor, or Chairman Pastor, really, these, you have to keep the debate focused on
All right.
the motion for reconsideration.
I would support the reconsideration because as many of the questions have proven, there is a lack of clarity on this specific issue since we only got to talk about it for about 3 minutes. And I think some of the votes may have been different if we actually had substance to what the city council has asked us to do at this specific meeting.
Call for the question.
okay, motion to reconsider been made and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Opposed?
The noes?
Probably should raise the eyes too, just, you know, seriously. Procedural.
Yeah, do it.
Because somebody might
Oh,
not
yes.
vote it or whatever.
Yes. Yes.
All right, is there a motion before the committee, the commission?
Since
What was the
it's-
result? I didn't hear.
No, the motion reconsidered, I think, passed.
It passed 9-4.
So we now back to discussion?
Yeah, well, we're back to somebody have a motion.
Yes,
Yes, where is it?
I move that we continue this
That's under
item
discussion.
for
Yes.
6 months and that we recommend to the subcommittee and the city council that they continue it for a like amount of time.
Is there a second?
Are we legal over that?
I'm sorry, I missed it. So there was a motion to, so essentially it's a motion to reconsider, and we're seeking to clarify whether it was a motion to continue or a motion to table. I heard the motion, the maker of the motion say continue for 6 months, so it's a motion to continue. It was seconded, so there is discussion
Yes.
on the motion to continue.
Okay, all right, there's motion to continue this item. That's going to be the recommendation that's going to go to the subcommittee. All right? Smith?
My point of supporting this continuance is because, number one, I would like to read
Take the mic.
oh, I'm sorry. I would like to read the book, the total program I haven't been exposed to. And I am also very concerned that the people it most affects, the developers in this, but the people that, one of them supported of it, said that they felt like that they'd been dropped out. And so I have pretty hard issues with that. And I'll be voting in favor of continuance. Thank you.
Okay. Patrick?
So as to whether these guidelines have been vetted, wanted to ask fellow commissioners to consider a couple things. One is that these are essentially the complete street guidelines as presented by NACTO, I think, correct? In essence, at least, with some minor revisions and whatnot. NACTO is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, thank you. And these NACTO guidelines generally conform with the AASHTO guidelines, which are the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. And these have also been referenced in FHWA documents and the Arizona Department of Transportation documents regarding context-sensitive solutions. I think I got that term correct as a quote directly from some of those. These have been debated. I believe these conform to the 2014 NACTO guidelines that were debated at a national conference that was based on the 2011 AASHTO guidelines, more or less. We're working off of those as the standard throughout the country, throughout our states, throughout our cities. So to say that we haven't carefully considered these, I think is an interesting comment, because then, my thought about stakeholder input and consideration is that generally these are looking at guidelines to promote a type of thought that goes into how the actual design happens, how the geometric design happens, and how that protects the people whose transit we are funding, whose pedestrian accessibility we're funding, whose ADA accessibility we're funding. Looking at things like bollards, which our commission has certainly recommended in order to make our streets more usable by vulnerable users. So to say that this is outside of our scope, to say that it's premature, I don't think that's correct at all. And I think that when we talk about, so one, to suggest that the city streets department should not be concerned with safety as a primary concern, I just want to make sure I got that clear, that safety is not the most important thing. Can I ask for clarification from a fellow commissioner, or is that out of order? Because what I heard is we're helping people get to where they're going faster.
Efficiently and safely as possible.
So does that mean heaven, like while they're still young and innocent?
Don't you have the?
What's the context? Is it,
There's a handout you can reference.
So
we
how-
don't need to debate what's on the paper.
well, so how was February for deaths by pedestrians?
I saw safety.
How has 2018 shaped up? So that's where I think there's an urgency to this that we absolutely need to consider. That urgency is human life.
Okay, thank you.
Apparently, my fellow commissioner has not read the staff recommendation. He presents this idea like it's all been approved by all these organizations. Our own staff didn't approve it. We got a whole page of recommendations from our own staff. So it's by no means approved.
Anyone else? Jennifer?
Mr. Chairman, can we, with a continuation for 6 months, can we bring this back for discussion at the next meeting and have an action in 6 months? Procedurally, I don't know how that works.
Well, the motion is this will be continued for 6 months. So I would find it very difficult to bring this next meeting. Well, I mean,
What you have for discussion?
well, I'm asking Mr. Brown, so he's
Turn off your
Can we have somebody turn off their mic, please?
There we go. Thank you very much.
So,
So, Chairman Pastor, so with a motion to continue for 6 months, you cannot bring the item back until the 6 months has expired. The commissioner is correct. If the item is tabled, but that was not the motion, then, so I'm not going to confuse you, but then it could at any time. So right now, as it sits procedurally, the item would come back in 6 months.
Clarifying question?
Yes.
Could the topic be brought back for discussion only without action prior to 6 months?
Chairman Pastor, Commissioner, no.
No.
well, okay. Rick,
So I just wanted to talk about
well,
why.
hold on. Are you finished, Jennifer?
I am, yes.
All right.
I just wanted to talk about why I opposed the motion before and why I will oppose this motion too, although it's better worded than the last one. I wasn't confused at the time I was voted, but afterwards I got confused. I was on the city staff when this got started, when the committee was appointed. I think when the first layer, what was that called? It was policy, right? There was a policy adopted. This committee was set up to do the work to figure this all out. That was like in 2014. And so this notion that we haven't had a chance to get any input on this seems a little far-fetched. But
Even by staff?
well, I'm not talking about. Well, the staff has disagreements with a final recommendation that was made by a commission this March, but the process has been going on. They made the recommendation several times before in different iterations, and the staff, and it never got to the city council, which is why that petition brought it to them. I don't disagree with the notion that we should have public input on things, and I don't disagree with what Reed said about. We ought to be concerned about costs and ought to try to understand those things. I don't disagree with what Lisa said about the process, that there are a lot of people who have concerns about it. But this has been going on for 3 years, and so You know, I don't like the idea of continuing it for 6 months. The council heard this last week and said, staff, we don't want to hear it in June, we want to hear it in May. They didn't even take your recommendation last week to go through a process over 60 days. And so they have set a tone of urgency, and this is our chance to have input before the council votes on it. I get that this is the first time before this commission, because
I've never heard the term before tonight.
right, you know, we never had a chance to talk about this subject, and it is complicated. And so we're not going to get to a discussion tonight. I would be willing to support a continuance of a month or something like that, so that there's, you know, more time. But to put it off for another 6 months when the city council just sped it up by a month, and when it's been going on for 3 years, I mean, you guys, I assume you have an opportunity, you've seen this stuff and had an opportunity to give input. I want to hear what your input is, and let's get going on it. Maybe it's 60 days. I just don't want to put it off for 6 months. I think it's too long.
Mr. Chairman, to the point of engagement, I will say to you that I have an individual staff member at AGC that's pretty well engaged with the city of Phoenix. And I asked her today, what was your involvement? And she said there was very limited outreach to her. And I think that as one of the oldest construction associations in the state who actually build these roads, who actually would be building the complete streets, hey, look, we can be all in favor of this. That's a no-brainer for us, right? It's projects, whatever. But sometimes you have to take a step back and ask, what was the process? And if the individual that's in my office wasn't asked to completely engage in this, right, then that's a red flag for me. Had she not told me that that was the case with her, then it would be a completely different conversation, and I could, in fact, speculate as to whether or not it's correct or not. But I know personally that that was the case. And so Valley Partnership comes with credibility based on our organization's experience.
Mr. Chairman,
Let me get Brett.
I just want to, could I answer that?
All right, well, hurry up.
Just in my experience, I mean, so I left the city in the fall of 2015. And prior to me leaving the city, I heard that there were concerns from AMA and Valley Partnership and other organizations about this. So it's not like people weren't engaged about it then. That's why actually the council subcommittee, when it acted way back when to adopt the policy and set up the committee, that's all they did. I think there were ideas of going farther than that, but there was input from the development community that were concerns about this. I'm not saying cram it through tonight because of that, but I just think a shorter time period would be warranted, given how long it's been out there.
Right.
Yeah, I come at this from a maybe slightly different view. So our commission has been commissioned, right, to implement T2050. And that T2050 has very specific goals that we need to deliver to the public. What I don't know, and I don't see in this recommendation, is how this affects our ability to do or not do that goal. So I don't know if we can still pave the same number of miles of streets, create the same number of bike lanes, do the things that we signed up to do, because that's what the voters approved based on these guidelines. And so without that, I don't know how we can be fiscally responsible as a commission and approve or reject them, either way, without having that input. And so I'm with Commissioner Naimark. I would like a continuance, but I'd like the continuance to be shorter. And I think we should make a motion, or at least inform the city council that we need to know the fiscal impacts of this. And if we can get that quickly, then we can move on.
Off the mic, I just asked, was this an amendable motion? And maybe that's
Motion to amend.
maybe that's something we would want to consider, is that maybe, I'm beginning to hear that there's several people that are concerned about the long time. Maybe 60 days would be more in line with Two people that have the most.
Ask the maker of the motion.
Could staff have some of those answers to us by next month?
Well, let him talk to the maker, go
But
ahead.
would you be amenable to the 6 months being amended to 60 days? 4 months.
Or 30.
Well, when are we talking about, 60 days? That would be a June meeting. We don't have any meetings scheduled in June. The next meeting we would have after next month, in May, will be about.
Mr. Chairman, just a comment. The only specific request we had from a petitioner was for 6 months. And I don't claim to be an expert on how long this process takes, but it sounds to me from everybody's testimony that there's been a lack of input and a lack of fiscal accountability here. And so that's why I chose 6 months. That's the only number that was requested. And I'd be hesitant to change that.
Okay. All right, we're running out of time, so I have a person wants to speak from the public, and I'm going to give her 2 minutes.
Thanks. My name is Leslie Dornfeld, and I'm speaking as a member of the public. I attended just about every single one of the Complete Streets Advisory Committee meetings. I think I can answer some of your questions about process and cost. In fact, there was an extensive process to look at cost, which is why that particular condition, which is the same condition used by federal highways, was put into the policy. The way we looked at cost was suggested by the development community, and we followed their process. They attended most of the meetings, almost all of them. We selected 5 different projects. Again, the development community selected those projects, and we tested the Complete Streets design guidelines on each one of them. We had the development community present them. We asked for cost implications. Basically, there were none. In the one project they presented as a showcase project up near USAA Today, there were extensive costs in terms of linear foot per lot, but when asked about it, it turns out those costs were related to terrain and not to anything that they would have done as a result of implementation of Complete Streets. I might also add that this policy was heard and reviewed by 26 village planning committees. The development community was involved in most of the meetings. When we adopted the Complete Streets policy, which does state complete streets dedicated to the city need to meet the Complete Streets design guidelines, the development community walked out of the room and did not return. They were invited to every single meeting, and they are on our mailing list. We are not asking that any streets that remain private be designed as complete streets, and in fact, they are not subjected to the Complete Streets design guidelines. The only streets that we are asking the guidelines be applied to, and again, those are design guidelines. Most of the staff recommendations are just to allow them to make engineering decisions in the response of safety were made, but any street that's dedicated to the city should meet those design guidelines so that taxpayers do not have to spend money to go back and retrofit those streets to prevent accidents and to accommodate modes that should have been placed on that street originally. And that's the purpose of that statement. We are not asking the development community to build private streets and keep private streets that meet the design guidelines. That is nowhere in the documentation.
Mr. Chairman.
I have one more thing to say. The NACDO design guidelines are adopted by 60 cities.
We're back to 2 minutes. So
Okay.
you had your 2
Thank
minutes.
you. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, I would just remind the commission and my fellow Commissioner Brennan that even our own staff doesn't approve of this. We have an entire page of amendments. So it's even the city staff doesn't approve of this.
Staff recommended approval.
All right,
So
to the motion, any further discussion? We're quickly running
Yes.
off the question.
I've been following this for a long time, and I believe, at least a year ago, the commissioner that requested this presentation about Complete Streets be brought to this commission. So if you said you didn't hear about this book, that presentation was about the book because these guidelines are based on the NACDO guidelines. And I almost printed out actually a PDF of all of the cities that have adopted this across the country, but I realized I didn't have enough paper or ink. So it would look silly for this commission to continue this longer than 30, 60 days because the city council has asked us to look at it. it has gone through the proper process, and it's not up to us to stop it at this point.
Okay, all right.
Can I ask a question?
No, I think we call for the question.
Which is
All right.
not
So
debated.
repeat the question.
What's the motion on the floor?
The motion is, motion to continue this matter for 6 months. Am I correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. That's the motion.
That's,
And to recommend the council continue for a like period of time.
yes, that's right.
All right, so that's, everybody understand the motion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. What, we-
Yes, yeah.
You got it?
Yeah, sorry.
Can I request a roll call?
Oh, yeah.
Does this count?
Yeah, let's.
Sure. Well, those opposed, raise your hand. Then you can answer.
7 opposed.
You want the
and
roll
6
call?
Yeah, 7 opposed and 6 yeses.
I think we should.
What? Okay, roll call.
Commissioner Aldiari?
No,
I forgot.
Where are we?
no.
No. Commissioner Brennan?
No.
Commissioner Glau?
Yes.
Commissioner Knight? No. Commissioner Loyola?
I voted no.
Commissioner Martin?
Yes.
Commissioner Mellor?
Yes.
Commissioner Mellor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Naimark?
No.
Commissioner Paniagua?
No.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Commissioner Tempest? No. Chair Pastor?
Yes.
Seven, 6, 7 noes and 6 yeses. So 7 are opposed.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to continue this item for 3 months and make the same recommendation that the city council also replicate that recommendation.
Is there a second?
Whatever that.
Second.
There is no 3 months.
Yeah, there's no June meeting.
Okay, motion,
3 months and a second.
motion made and second. Discussion?
We need to find a meeting to continue it to. Do we not have meetings in June
Yeah,
or
you will,
July?
this will put you in what, in
Right.
August?
3 months would be the July meeting, for which there's not a meeting on the schedule for.
Mr. Chairman, then to that point, I would amend my motion to make it 4 months because that would put us at May, June, July, August, or August. Can I make a specific motion to a specific date, to a specific meeting day?
Yeah, as the maker, you can certainly.
So
modify it. It's just the second
that
half.
we continue this until our August meeting?
Is there a second?
That's my motion. I would recommend the council.
Okay, motion made and second. All those, any discussion?
Yes,
Okay, we're running out of time, so you got less than a minute.
right, I question why we can't see this next month. I recognize that we're not going to reach any kind of resolution tonight, and I think there were some good questions that were brought up. But one of those regarding cost, does the city not have a protocol when we're talking, one of the specific concerns that was brought up was street dedications from private developers. Isn't cost taken into account in staff recommendations from either planning and development or streets that do consider cost, or are we lacking that kind of process? Because that seems like a more overarching kind of concern than directly applicable to design guidelines. Is it not?
If I understand your question correctly, Commissioner Brennan, the answer would be no. The costs are not taken into account for extractions of developers or dedication to right-of-way or development, the building of right-of-way as part of development.
Chairman, so there are exactions that there is proportionality, there's that cost is related, but as to when or how we dedicate streets, the cost is not considered for that.
I'm sorry, exactions is what I was specifically referencing.
Okay,
My concern is that if we postpone until August, the subcommittee is going to take action and our recommendation is going to be moved. So why even bring it up?
That's a possibility. That's part of life. Go ahead.
Just a quick clarifying question. These guidelines would apply to streets that are already built as well, right? If we were to repave them or modify them in some way in the future, wouldn't they also have to be brought into compliance? And so on that aspect, has city staff reviewed cost impact to how streets would be redone and whether or not that would affect our ability to meet T2050 goals?
Commissioner Aldieri, no, that analysis has not been.
Do you have a quick estimate of what it would take to do that? Could it be done in 30 days?
30, I think 30 days would be very difficult to do that. You know, when we're talking about design guidelines, as we've talked about before, these are not the specific standards that would be applied to specific projects. There are some elements in the design guidelines that we know could increase costs, but it will be very difficult to do that analysis, and so we would at least need some more time and a recognition that any estimates would be very ballpark ranges.
All right. Motion is to continue this matter to our August meeting. Any questions on the, any?
Mr. Chair, and to recommend that the city council delay their consideration for a like period of time.
Okay.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman, I have one comment on the motion.
Well, come on, let's move it.
Oh, yeah, the garage.
Right, well, there's.
I'm extremely disappointed that this started in 2014 and it's now 2018 and it hasn't gotten itself together. So in August,